Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at the Be Women Weekly Dialogues, our webinars to share, learn on impact leadership and about impact action. I'm Laura Jadrukoc, founder of the Be Women and very passionate about the Be movement. Actually, the ones who know me personally as Marcello will say that I really live and breathe what is using business as a force for good. Before we get started, for a few words about who are we, Be Women. We are a global network of women entrepreneurs that seek to balance purpose and profits in the markets towards an economy of care, economy of values, of collaboration for all of us, people and planets. And we have today, Marcello Palazzi, you will be absolutely inspired in the next half an hour with everything he has to say as one of the leaders, main leaders of the B Corp movement worldwide. I think he's the one who will convince more of the big companies to really go for the B impact assessment. He has an incredible trajectory as one of the most audacious sustainability experts and trailblazer, or really someone who actually does things and gets the system change in course. So for more than 30 years, he's been on this track. And now, Marcello, please share with us, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Laura. Fantastic. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So for me, it started, you mentioned to us, I was a young entrepreneur in a family business between UK, Switzerland, and Italy in environmental diagnostics. One of the first companies in Europe to actually create, we put laboratories and test kits for water, for soil, in order to reduce the quantity of fertilizers being used and determine the quality of waters. So I did that for 12 years, 13 years, and then I started the foundation, Progressio Foundation, with a Dutch friend here in the Netherlands. And we wrote a book about the civic economy, which is basically the old Greek idea of oikonomia, that economics is something that aims at achieving well-being and achieving the good of all, the good of the household. And the household, of course, now is the globe. And so this has been my journey for 30 years, trying to promote this kind of an economy. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I met the founders of B Lab, and they asked me to start the B Corps in Europe, which I did. And now in the last 2 years, I've been global ambassador. So it's basically been concretizing this passion of mine for so many years. B Corp is, you don't need to talk too much, which is what many of us in this space have done for many years. You can just do it. Basically, you got the methodology, the assessment, the indicators, the sort of philosophy. You can actualize it by becoming a B Corp and undertaking the journey, which is also not just the journey in a way starts when you become a B Corp. You can become a better B Corp, you can improve, you can evolve your company. So it's really a roadmap for companies that are serious about the changes we need in the world, at least in the economic world, in the capitalism, towards more inclusion, more sustainability, more entrepreneurship, actually, because that's part of the movement, is to be more entrepreneurial, finding creative solutions for people's needs all around the world, and certainly developing countries where, often there is no electricity, or at least not renewable electricity, mobility, health, education, etc. So this is a bit my story. I think it's really about B Corp makes very concrete some of what I and others have been saying for 30 years.
Yeah, you were really very clear on saying what has happened maybe in the last 10 years of what's going on, but what's the next 10 years of this movement of using business as a force for good, and the future of the impact assessment, the SDG action manager? What are your thoughts and your vision?
So the vision that I share with my fellow colleagues and friends in the B movement is, of course, we talk about shared prosperity. We talked about a regenerative economy. We are all, we have all benefited and been involved in companies all our lives. So we see the power of entrepreneurship, of course, I would say the power of free markets, but we want to make sure that they deliver even better, particularly the issues we know: climate, natural resources, equality, social well-being. So how do we shift this capitalism in such a direction. And the B Corps are key. The way they started with more radical companies, you know, Ben and Jerry. Even before Ben and Jerry, there were smaller companies that were really at the leading edge of this sort of change, transformation. And then we got to Patagonia and family businesses. In the last few years, the big companies started coming. You know, Unilever, Danone, now the Gap, and Engie, Philips. We are now in conversations with many of the big multinationals that they see that B Corp has become a global, I call it the global trust mark for business. If you're serious about these changes, if you're serious about governance, integrity, ethics, and of course, entrepreneurship and success in terms of financial performance, the B Corp has become the kind of credible way to do that. So we are now 3,220 B Corps as of this morning in 71 countries. We also have a legislation called the Benefit Corporation by law, which is a law in 34 states in the US. It was then passed in Italy, in Colombia, a few weeks ago in Ecuador. It was passed in British Columbia and Canada, and you have countries like Australia, Taiwan, Argentina, where it's been debated in Parliament. Many lawyers are interested in this. So we see a parallel movement. So the certification as B Corp is a continuous assessment and journey. The legislation, the law, is basically enshrining in the legal system what we mean by being above and beyond only for profit. So it's about moving away from the shareholder primacy to a wider understanding of the purpose and the benefits that businesses can share in society. So it is where we are. We've got other big things like China is a country we've been working on for the last 2 years, and we are soon going to launch in Chinese everywhere in China in Chinese. Of course, after that will be India. So we are covering some of these larger markets. After, of course, having done, you know, US and South America, Canada, Europe, several countries in Southeast Asia, etc. The next 10 years, you know, so we're now in a very good moment. We have kind of proved the validity, the credibility of the assessment of the B Corp methodology, the B Corp philosophy. And so now the next 10 years is really about scaling, exponential scaling. So we don't have a fixed idea in terms of numbers, but definitely we want to go from 3,000 to 30,000 or maybe even 300,000 companies in the next 10 years. It's always going to be difficult. We now have 100,000 users, and in a way you would say only 3% of these 100,000 have become B Corps. But that's a sign that it's a rigorous process. So the numbers are not the only objective we have. More importantly is to identify and invite and also respond, because we get lots of responses now, requests from companies. The most iconic companies in the world, at the moment, for example, I'm working with one of the largest headhunting company in the world, one of the largest law firm in the world, some large advertising companies, actually one of the largest French-based company, all interested in, and some have started the journey already. So we see in a way that the mainstream of business is more and more open to the transformation that is implicit in becoming a B Corp.
That is fascinating, because you see, what I hear from you is that you say the B Impact Assessment is like the MRI of companies, the real thing, you see everything. Then you have the Benefit Corporation that is really moving and inspiring the lawyers that have been really more traditional as an industry, I'm a lawyer myself. And then you have the accounting industry that is also moving forward in this through other ways of how to deal with the intangibles. So my question to you is twofolded. One is, how are we going to, in the future, measure the intangibles that are culture, things that are really SDG thing that really matter to our society? Paul Pullman a few months ago said that 80% of the value of a company might be in intangibles, because that is what is driving forward the company. Only a few months ago, there's been a report that says companies are doing really well with the ESG are the most successful and have the highest leverage and highest benefits. So what's happening on that area, please?
So I think that I want to say I completely agree with what you just said now about intangibles. I'll give you one example. So in the conversation I had with the chairman of this top law firm just last week in Amsterdam, we talked about some of the cases that have happened in the last few months. The last one is Boeing. We know what it means. Boeing, everyone knows about Boeing, how they messed up and what the value or the loss of value in the share price and the reputation of the company. Before Boeing, we had WeWork. Again, WeWork, just amazing bad governance and more than bad governance, bad management. Thirdly, we had Uber. In the US, we had Uber. In Europe, we had this amazingly bad case of Bayer buying Monsanto, and in a year and a half, losing 40 billion euros of value. So these are just examples of companies that don't do the discipline of good governance. And also, which is actually, I'm not saying that if they were a B Corp, they'd been a B Corp, it wouldn't have happened, but it would have prevented them from not seeing. The board members, the shareholders would have been much more aware that there was a potential liability, a potential loss of credibility, a potential, black swan kind of event. And therefore, it's evident. Now, you talk about accountants, you talk about lawyers, it's very clear. Actually, with the chairman of this law firm, we discussed, we concluded very clearly, and he knows from his experience, been 20 years with this firm, that actually being a well-governed company doesn't have a cost. It actually doesn't, it is not a cost. It's actually just a sound investment. And that is why what we learned from a lot of the family companies, family businesses that are B Corps, this is how family businesses run their business. Mostly, of course, there are always some examples, but mostly they know their name is on the door, and therefore they have to have the highest regard for their reputation and their governance, etc. So I think it's just really good business. This is on the governance side. And now we know from the climate agenda that obviously the environmental issue, the regeneration issue is so important. And of course, people. We know about people. We go back to theory X, theory Y. 40 years ago, this guy McGregor. You can choose how you want to run your company, but the fact is that if you run your company in a kind of humanistic, respectful way, it also pays back. It is not a cost. And so in the intangibles, I think that the intangibles reflect some of the issues that we're talking about. So obviously it's about reputation, it's about, in a way, social capital, at least human capital within the firm, it's talent, it's of course the know-how the firm has, and in a way the potential to utilize these towards climate solutions, towards the SDGs. We know how many billions and trillions are needed to meet the SDGs. So these all go together, and to say that companies that are alert and aware, they have a kind of extra sensitivity, they'll be the ones that will benefit the most. And so I'm very optimistic. Of course, this is not going to be for everyone, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we have enough of 10, 15, 20% of companies in the world that would actually move in this direction. And then we can kind of flip and change the economic system.
Yes, I really admire when Bill Drayton talks about the issue of the tipping point. The moment there's a tipping point, things might change to a better world. And one of the things that most people say, the tipping point for sustainability will be when fund managers, when the whole industry of the capital industry will actually move forward towards sustainability. And for example, BlackRock is every year, their annual report, they always say we are moving forward. We're really warning all these companies that are not doing, they're not really socially and environmentally responsible to move there. Otherwise, we might not invest there. So where do you think, is this happening, that ESG investment, impact investment is really growing? Is this a like part of the B movement of really creating that tipping point?
So I think that given that I'm in Amsterdam and because I work globally, but Europe is my kind of home. Europe is going very far. I mean, just the day before yesterday, the EU has announced a €1 trillion investment in the next 10 years towards the Green Deal, the so-called EU Green Deal. The European Investment Bank, which is meeting on the 4th of February, some of us are going to this meeting, is actually, well, they want to find companies and investment funds that are able to absorb all this public money that will be going into this direction. So Europe is quite ahead. We have a lot of banks inside the B Corp movement. The most well-known in terms of ethical bank is Triodos, which is, of course, in 5 or 6 countries in Europe. They have started an alliance called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. Altogether, I think the whole alliance has something like 200 billion in investment. So it's not trillions yet, but it is real billions. And they've been doing this for 40 years. It's definitely going in this direction. I think that, you know, BlackRock, as you said, but we've been working with one of the top global banks based in Paris. They are going very strong in this direction. They tell us that their clients are going in this direction. So they get actually, they're under pressure from families and family offices and family businesses to move in this direction. So this is not going to happen from one day to the next, but in the next 10 years, I would say, and I must say, very important, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, Lombard Odier, which is 300 and something years old, became a B Corp last year. So they have like nearly 300 billion Swiss francs under management. So it is happening. I think that, you know, this is great. There are some questions about the whole kind of consumption society we have created. So at some point we have to discuss, you know, what is the economy we want to build? In a way, it has to be more service-based, more people-based, and less stuff-based, because that's one of the challenges of sustainability. But luckily we have a lot of interested, you know, we have B Corps in the pharmaceutical space and a lot of service companies. So it isn't only, you know, selling a product, which, you know, can be challenging in terms of sustainability. And one of the big problems, of course, around the world is that we are shipping all this stuff, you know, Fiji water from Fiji to Australia and US, etc. So we got to stop some of those things. So there are still big issues, but on the whole, this movement of progressive companies and the B movement, we talk about movement of movements, is B Corp plus B Team plus Impact Investors. So this wider movement is really at the leading edge of making these changes. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Yes, and this is fascinating, because what you mentioned is all these market actors that are the public-private companies that are really looking at the B impact assessment as a measurement. Then you have the B lawyers or benefit corporation law that is really moving this forward, accounting. Now, the last one that is missing is the government. To my knowledge, from Mendoza, I know they created this new law. They passed this new law called for procurement of buying and services and products that are sustainable companies. And this is one of the first ones they've done in a more systematic way. So this is basically the government starting to become another actor of the triple bottom line. What is happening in Europe regarding that? How are the governments reacting, instead of just buying the cheapest and the easiest, buying from companies as sustainable?
So I think Europe is very interesting because I worked a lot in Sweden and Denmark, in Norway a little bit, but Denmark and Sweden for many years. And these are countries that have had a very active government in building a sustainable economy. So Denmark, 20 years ago, they had 100% tax on cars. They shifted from fossil fuel to renewables. Sweden did something similar around, you know, promoting biofuels and waste programs, and so these are countries that are very far ahead. So this country like Sweden and Denmark have been very progressive, and now we see the EU with this new commission that was passed, that was elected just before Christmas, very active. The Green Deal that the EU has promoted, Vice President Frans Timmermans, is amazing, and it is really not only what the EU as a European Union is doing, but also the how it's cascading down to member countries, to regions, to cities. So Europe has that ambition of becoming the most sustainable continent, and I think it's great. We have some cities that have done work with us, and you mentioned Mendoza. We have had Lisbon, Geneva. Now we're doing Edinburgh, Barcelona. These are cities that are embracing the B movement, the B indicators, and in one example, in Edinburgh led the whole of Scotland to create a program called Scotland Can Be, where they are looking exactly at this sort of procurement guidelines, how to make sure that, when many of these countries, 40–50% of GDP is partly controlled by governments, how do they make the decisions in favor of companies and products that are, sustainable, regenerative, etc. So I think we are in a good place. I mean, obviously, it should have happened 20 years ago, but at least now, let's use the energy there is now and the people in power who really want to make these changes.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, B Women has had already 3 webinars in Spanish, English, and Portuguese on Ciudades Más B, or Cities Can Be, and it's been really, I think, is one of the best movements that B Lab or the B movement has really pushed, because cities are major buyers, major influencers, and this is really something that is really catching up. And the experience we had in Mendoza was that since we started in Mendoza, now there's many cities, many little villages that are becoming like B cities, and in Europe it's really moving forward, as well as in Asia. So
yeah, no, and I've had a request. I've had a request. Our office here is the first SDG house in the world in Amsterdam, and I've had at least 2 or 3 cities say, "Oh, can we become B cities? Can we use the assessment for cities?" So this is something we should be thinking of doing, of helping cities to actually use the same indicators, the same framework to assess where they want to go, what do they measure, etc., etc. So we are it's a good opportunity.
And what other initiatives, what are the most favorite initiatives you have from the B movement, other than the B cities, maybe the multipliers, or other ones that you consider that is worth to mention today?
So one that we have is, you alluded to this earlier, is the B lawyers. So there is a growing number of lawyers. There is an organization called ESELA, which is it's international. I think it used to be European, but now it's global. Lawyers for a more socially responsible economy. They are growing in strength. We have had a conversation about extending this to other professional bodies, so accountants, insurers. So we are extending that conversation. I think there'll be another meeting of ESELA in London in April, where we're going to try and get more of these professional bodies. One of the things you said at the beginning about accountants and intangibles. So how do we involve more and more of these service industries around the B movement? I think that we see some more and more collective initiatives by B Corps working together. It's enormously impactful, because just 3, 4, 5 big companies come together in a kind of synergistic way can achieve miracles. By buying each other's products, doing plastic initiatives together, packaging. These are big issues that cannot be solved by one company alone. So I say that this collective action by either companies in the same industry or sometimes across industries, very, very powerful. We have in the city of The Hague in the Netherlands become, they call themselves the Impact City. They recently hosted the Global Entrepreneurship Summit between the US government and the Dutch government with 2,000 entrepreneurs. And the agenda was very, very similar. I was leading a session on the B movement, the B economy, but everywhere they were talking about, health, education, mobility, of course, all with the lens of sustainability and regeneration. So I think that more and more of these either private partnerships, business to business, business with business, or public-private partnerships, so cities and public bodies working with industry and the business community, very, very important. And just yesterday I was in Italy. One of our leading B Corps, the CEO, is been tipped to become the next head of the Italian Industry Confederation. And so he can have an enormous impact. There's 150,000 companies part of that association. So we see the actual B leaders, B Corp leaders, and in your case, B women, very, very important, starting often from their own companies, but what can they do for the whole system? So this sort of system change allows and gives opportunities to these B leaders, B women or men, to actually have positions of responsibility in associations of business, in cities, in the public sector, or at least partnering with the public sector. So there's a great potential. I think we're past the point where people will say, well, it is still quite marginal, it's only kind of the Greens. No, this is now everybody's business, actually.
So if you, you say you had the magic wand, what are the things that you would like to see happen in the next 5 years so this will scale worldwide?
So I think the first thing, which many of us used to say already some time ago, is we should stop doing the wrong things. So, for example, that we're spending still trillions a year in so-called perverse subsidies. Our governments are paying for fossil fuel companies. It's ridiculous. We should just stop doing all these sort of, perverse things that are actually still supporting the old economy, the kind of fossil fuel, the carbon economy. Very important. And this is where also, as you were saying, cities, public sector have a very, very big role to play. And I shouldn't say this to you in America. In the United States, it's still crazy. The amount of money that is going to subsidize or support or finance. So, first one is perverse. Stop doing the perverse things. Secondly, it's key, what BlackRock and others is stop putting money into, so this is where the B Corp assessment, and it's very easy, every company that you invest in should pass the B Corp assessment. And that's it, you will be enormous impact.
You need to mention that the B Corp, the B Impact Assessment is free, online, and confidential. So what better than that? And B Lab has invested, as an NGO, has invested more like $15-20 million for the last 15 years to get it right and simple, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and more actually. I think the numbers are close to 40 million in the last 10-11 years, including Sistema B in South America, B Lab Europe, and B Lab UK. So close to $40 million to develop this sort of, the language, the philosophy, the indicators, the discipline of becoming a B Corp. So it would be very easy if we could maybe, so your answer, the magic wand would be, hey, and I often think, every penny, every euro, every dollar that we either spend, save, or invest should actually go towards companies that pass this sort of threshold. One of our colleagues who runs the B Corps in Italy, he created a very nice chart where he shows that this point, the 80 score, is like the break-even point between extractive or regenerative capitalism. So basically, if you're less than 80 points, so if you don't manage to become a B Corp, at least to score, you are basically extracting from society, from the planet. So it would be very easy if we said, hey, every company in the world, they need to meet the 80. And then, we will be a long way, much, much further ahead. So maybe that will be the biggest wish, which of course, as I said earlier, it will be, implemented in the financial world. So every single dollar we save, spend, or invest should go to these companies. And we should stop doing the wrong thing with all these perverse subsidies and, crazy things like if you go into any cities around the world in the middle of the night, all the lights are on and public buildings. We should stop doing these silly things, So.
Yeah, or air conditioning. That is a big consumer of unnecessary energy, and also in the food industry, there's a lot of waste.
We have a new B Corp since the other day. It's called Too Good to Go. which is started by an amazing young woman entrepreneur in Denmark. I mean, maybe she should become part of your B Women. Yeah. And this company is now already like 30 or 40 million in sales. They're doing business in the Netherlands and Spain and Italy. And it's basically all about food waste and, reducing and stopping food waste.
Yeah, no, there are incredible examples in the food industry. You have beers that are made from waste, or companies that are actually giving only healthy stuff to public schools. That's I think, huge revolution in the United States. So the B Corp movement is really attracting all these that before maybe were called social entrepreneurs, and now they are real companies, for-profit companies that are really creating system change. And one of the last things, what about Asia? I know you have been the most audacious and strong in really pursuing this movement in Asia. What do you see happening in the next few years in Asia, and how will this movement accelerate in Asia?
So, yeah, I love Asia, and I think of course Asia is it's the biggest continent in the world. They have the most people and etc. So it's so obvious that that this shift towards a different capitalism, regenerative capitalism, has to happen in Asia. So we have amazing people from all the way from Japan, and then Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and all the way down to Indonesia, and then Australia, obviously. Australia too, because it's sort of connected with, at least with the investment from Asia. It's going. We started earlier in the US and Europe and South America, so we were a bit later to get going in Asia, but now we have had a partnership with the Leping Foundation in China. So they've been working very strongly in the last 2 years and making everything available in Chinese. They have an amazing young leader, Min Ko, who is running the Chinese B Lab. Fantastic. And the team, a lot of young people, young entrepreneurs. So there's a lot coming out of China. And I think that where it has been slightly challenging is that the government, some of these governments in Asia have not been as progressive as we would like them to be. Because this is where I can say this with respect, but I can say this as a European. Europe has really taken the lead, at least the European Union, on this. And, the US is lagging behind, and some countries in South America have got other problems at the moment. So in Asia, we see there's a mix. Of course, there's always Singapore is the best, most advanced. South Korea, I was in Seoul just before Christmas for the Green Week. Amazing work they're doing there. There's, the Green Growth Institute is based in Seoul. They are working all around developing countries in Southeast Asia. So there is a lot happening actually in the development space. So renewable energy, water, health, sanitation. There is increasingly, it's becoming this sort of impact agenda. So it's very, very good. I think that what I see is the kind of challenge is that you got big infrastructure projects, the sort of this belt road that China is building, and of course many of these cities, there are like dozens of cities every year coming up in China. Yeah, it's hard to build sustainable cities, from scratch. Maybe it's easier sometimes than renovating cities, but still, it's just a massive scale. As you know, there is even now a problem with sand. We don't get enough sand, so there has to be imported from, thousands of miles away. So when you have this sort of fast expansion and growth of the Asian countries, it's harder to make it sustainable. But, the challenges are faced by these countries as well, so they have to do something. And there are, of course, a lot of very good examples. Like Tesla now is strong in China. They're building the first cars. So we see that happening too. And we as a movement, obviously it can only grow in Asia, and we see that Asian companies are more sensitive to what is needed in the wider world. So if you want to sell products globally, it also pays them to be more progressive and abide by higher standards. So it all kind of plays in our favor that actually this is what companies should be doing everywhere.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that actually Africa as a country also has been quite influenced by the B Corp movement, and because Africa in the end has like a leapfrog with technology from no electricity to having mostly now renewable electricity. So they are the next ones that can really move forward in an amazing way, where sustainable cities can really thrive. So what are your comments about Africa and what's happening there?
Well, we have 3 years ago, we started B Lab East Africa in Nairobi, which is working in other countries around Kenya. I think it's Uganda and Zambia and
Rwanda,
and a few more in the wider area. So there is movement. We have a number of development agencies like the Dutch, the British are there, and they are working with us in developing and promoting this model of, say, impact economy. So it's also moving. I think that what's very encouraging also, I'll just say, for your work of Be Women, a lot of women entrepreneurs in Africa, we find very progressive. They would definitely want to subscribe to this new philosophy of business. So very, very encouraging. I think that Africa is the biggest continent. And maybe you've seen the map in The Economist, you can put everything like China, US, and Europe inside Africa. So there's big diverse. So I think one should really look at different African, the parts of the African continent and specific countries to really do it justice. But I think that what I see is the next generation of entrepreneur, younger women, they are embracing this way of doing business. And therefore, that is very encouraging. We have, one thing I should also say that I'm forgetting is that it's not yet official, but I have, nudge my colleagues to create what we call the B Corp education programs for business schools and universities that want to be part of our movement. And in the next couple of weeks, we have a global call to see how everyone can be aligned around this. And we have a lot of interest from African universities and business schools. So if we start teaching a different kind of economy, different kind of economics and business, that's a way of making a big difference.
Yeah, and also B Lab has something called B Academics that are rounding up that type of business. But one thing that I am very grateful for the B Impact Assessment, that it really promotes transparency, and because you need to publicly have available your information if you become a B certified company. And I think that's with technology, with all the new ways of seeing what's happening, I think this will help a lot our society, because corruption has really impinged into democracy in a big way in the last year.
Very important.
So do you have any closing words so we can finish up, because the hour has come?
So Laura, I think that I've been saying this, before I met you, before the Be Women started, that actually women can be a kind of pivotal force in changing business in this direction. In many ways, and if you look now, just now, amazing, both the head of the IMF, the head of the European Investment Bank, and also the head of the World Bank, amazing women. So these are the women to go for. So I think the women can embrace a more kind of regenerative economy. It's actually partly, women can actually embody the kind of regenerative mindset and culture. So whenever I organize or I attend meetings of B Corps around the world, there's always at least 50% women. So I think that what you started doing is amazing, and it can be a huge contribution to the whole movement. So keep it up, and I will keep sharing names and links I have with women leaders with you. And all the best. Good luck.
Well, thank you very much. So this has been truly inspiring. And as a B Women, we are all about purpose, but about action. We measure ourselves with actually for this year, 2020, every B Women, we don't have a fee for our, to become a member of B Women, but you have to study and understand what is the B Impact Assessment for this year. And so every woman has the goal to actually inspire and help 3 new companies do the B Impact Assessment, not the certification, just the B Impact Assessment. So now with this, that you heard such amazing stuff from Marcello, I would like you to all think of a call to action. Meaning, I want you to get a piece of paper and a pen and write in the next 30 seconds who you're going to call, what you're going to do, who your SMS, who you're going to share this recording with, so that really you can move forward with real action, where what you're going to do to help the movement of using business as a force for good. So thank you, everybody. And just a few reminders. We have amazing webinars coming up. On January 21st, we have the Imaginal Cells by Kim Pullman, and that will really focus on what is the importance of the golden rule as a value in society and at the SDGs. Also, in January 30th, we're going to have Driving Financial Growth and Human Evolution Beyond Male-Made Tools. This is a radically innovative tool for society, and the speaker is Heidi Dangelmeyer. She is an MIT and Princeton PhD and has some really interesting things to share. And on February the 4th, SDG Action Manager were Laura Vélez and Laura Palmeiro from B-Lab and UN Global Compact will share about this tool. And we have also coming up many others that you can look in the website. So thank you again, Marcello, and for everybody who are listening to this call. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Laura, thank you very much. Goodbye.